Hey there, hope all is well. Back at you today with some more RTD news updates. And today I have a variety of articles, one being the possible currency war, two, hyperinflation versus deflation collapse, 2017 threshold to chaos, 7 out of 70% of Americans plan to work as long as possible during retirement, more news on the view of the euro, and interest rates being negative for much longer in Swiss. So before we actually get started, wanted to, as always, welcome you and thank you for watching RTD News Updates. And if you find these articles to be informative, I want you guys to share it, try to get the word out there to help more people become more monetarily aware of what's going on around them. And all of these things, of course, all tie back to the dollar in one way or another. So let's get started here. So out of the trumpet, we have, could World War III start with a currency war? So this article here is out of the trumpet. It's actually from yesterday, but yet it's quite lengthy in length. But it has to do with the idea of the whole, basically the Brexit, everything to do with the pound dropping or being devalued this past August, and possibly leading to what will be considered a trade war amongst Britain and other EU members. And so here it basically starts off with when Britain voted to leave the European Union in June. The one asset impacted most was the United Kingdom's most important, its currency. The pound plunged by 15% against the United States dollar. Only one time since 1792 has the pound fallen so low. The pound is one of the world's most important currencies. Prior to June 24th, a loss of such magnitude in a tier 1 currency was almost unheard of. This could have serious consequences, the more so because it's part of an already dangerous narrative. And so it goes on to talk about how this deliberate devaluation, how it plays into the whole currency war concept that's been underway amongst many other nations around the world that have been trying to better improve their exporting of their own goods. And so here it just goes on to give more information as to why the whole low interest rates and things that Britain is actually doing now and may possibly do will play into the end of globalization, as far as countries playing evenly and playing fair with one another in their trading practices. So basically, it boils down to the fact that at the current rate we're on now, it looks like there may be some beef amongst countries, predominantly a lot of EU members deciding to turn their back against Britain with trade, which will cause unemployment and all types of economic downturns there on that island. So interesting article here, a lot more detail if you guys are interested, and so articles below if you want to check it out. Here's a great article out of GoldSeek from Daryl Roberts Kuhn. He's a prior guest here on RTD interviews. If you guys haven't had a chance to check it out, definitely had a good discussion with him. But this article here, hyperinflation versus deflationary collapse. And so he actually lays out a nice little walkthrough of recent events over the last, several 40, 50 years that led up to the current state of possible, as he put it, hyperinflation. And he starts off talking about just, how the separation of fiat money or paper money from gold kind of began the trigger of creating these conditions. And he talks about it starting with the U.S. merchandise trade balance, or imbalance rather. So right around the mid 70-ish time frame, we really went into a deficit as far as our trade. And so now we, of course, we are in a trade deficit of, however much, this is 2012, but several $100 billion. And so from that, it said it led to, gold no longer kind of holding things down, went on a whole spending spree of just increasing the monetary supply, exponentially, as yesterday's news articles pointed to from SRS Rocco, which also led to overall just credit expansion in general. Just the fact that money was loaned into existence or borrowed into existence via loan, and so credit expansion to the tunes of 50 or plus trillion dollars as of today. And then he goes on to talk about today. This is the central bank's final and fatal conundrum. Aggregate levels of debt are now so high, credit can no longer induce sufficient economic expansion to pay off or even service capitalism's constant compounding debts. Central bankers' efforts to revive economic growth via quantitative easing, low and zero negative interest rates are like pouring more and more gasoline into an already flooded engine, hoping the additional gas will cause the stalled engine to go faster. Today, central banks are trapped by conditions they created. It was their excessive expansion of the money supply after 1971 that led to the speculative bubbles whose serial collapse resulted in the reawakening of deflationary forces not seen since the Great Depression. Then he goes on to prevent another Great Depression. They've actually implemented QE1, QE2, QE3, which hasn't really helped, because then he goes on to say that most of the money created has been on deposit on the bank's balance sheets now since the crisis, which has ran up the the Fed's balance sheet as well, which basically leads to the idea that, you know, they're now going to try to change the tune of what's going on. It says tomorrow, a hyperinflationary tsunami or a riptide of deflation or both. During the Great Depression, money appeared to disappear because of capitalists. Today, central banks are attempting to offset the growing global deflationary riptide by inflation targeting. So, as you guys have heard from several of these news commentaries over the last couple of weeks, how the idea of possibly raising the CPI number or inflate and monetary inflation threshold to go beyond the 2% is kind of what he's hinting at here. That basically they're going to try to ramp up the inflation so that people, you know, basically spend more and it costs more now, in a way of trying to get people to spend more. But he's also saying here that that model won't work either. He says so far deflation is winning, but should inflation gain the upper hand, hyperinflation, not inflation, will result as the monetary base is now too large to limit any inflationary surge. So basically what he's saying that once they, you know, actually start, you know, reaching some inflationary targets, it's going to get things rolling at a much faster pace where there will be no return from it. So that's how it's getting to the whole hyperinflation aspect. So basically, once they reach their inflation target, it is on to the races from there, as far as them probably losing control of prices and it getting really, really ugly, according to this article here. So great article below. If you're interested, check it out. Here's a great article here from Armstrong Economics, and it's entitled "Why 2007 is the Threshold to Chaos." And so, as always, he does some short work, but it's real packed with details of, you know, his projections and things like that on what's to come. So he basically talks about, you know, just, you know, looking ahead to next year, how as this year comes to an end, what are some things that's going to really, you know, cause some problems for next year. And he starts off with talking about I have been warning that 2007 was a year of political hell with 4 major referendums, elections that would undermine the confidence in government. We talk about the Brexit, U.S. presidential elections, French elections, and the German elections. These 4 events hold the potential to overturn the expectations of the future. Then he goes on to talk about, however, I've also warned that Social Security and Medicare go negative next year in the United States, which, of course, mainstream media is not bothering to report for their fear that they add fuel to the bonfire of political corruption. Then he goes on to talk about the idea of Obamacare. The entire structural design of Obamacare was a perpetual Ponzi scheme they used for Social Security. The theory behind Obamacare was to force the youth to buy health insurance, and since they are rarely in need of it as a group, they will be paying in more than they would receive. Thus, the idea would be Obamacare would exploit the youth to pay for those who could not afford health care because of preconditions. The theory failed because the youth did not buy the insurance. So he goes and talk about 2005. It's a 2% penalty, which was about $325 per adult, $165 per child, a maximum of $975 for the year if you didn't get it. Then the next year, this year here, it's 2.5% was a penalty, which equated to about $2,000 maximum of a fine. Then he goes on to say how it only gets worse from there. And so basically there's a study done showing that Obamacare has pretty much cost the healthcare providers themselves more money than they've made, to where one by one they're all looking to get out of the industry or to detach themselves from the whole Obamacare or Affordable Healthcare Act policy. So it says, indeed here, United Healthcare left most of the 34 state markets and Aetna is following. The Guardian reported that Obamacare is nearing collapse. The entire structure was based upon the same scheme as Social Security that has been predicated upon exploiting one generation for the next. Come 2017, we're likely to see Obamacare also collapse. And he says if Hillary gets in, they're going to increase taxes on you to then fund that. So basically he's saying that from here on out, it is going to get ugly. The healthcare business has been the only industry, aside from politicians in Washington, who has not subject to the business cycle. So basically saying because government has subsidized the healthcare industry, they've been pampered for way too long, and if it collapses, they'll be better off going to just a one pay type of system, which will then bring back competition, which is long lost in that industry. So great article here as always. If you're interested, check it out below. Here's an article here from Value Walk, and it's entitled 70% of Americans plan to work as long as possible during retirement. And so here they basically did some surveying and came up with some numbers that is quite alarming for the younger generation. It says 70% of non-retired Americans plan to work as long as possible during retirement, according to a bank rate report. Only 25% say they have no plans to work during retirement. And so that is a big mind shift or paradigm shift from the concept of working hard all your life, saving some money aside in your retirement fund, and then spending the latter days of your life enjoying being able to live off that money. So basically what they're saying is here, the millennials, centennial generation, those that are still in the workforce, aren't really confident at all that they'll have enough saved to be able to retire, so they will have to work. And then it says, of those who plan to work as long as possible during retirement, 38% are planning to work because they like to work, and 35% said they plan to work because they need the money. 25% said both. Working during retirement years brings a lot of benefits, said Jill Cornfield, bankrate.com retirement analyst. I'm not surprised that nearly 3/4 of people say they like to work as long as they can while in retirement. It's not just the money. When you can work as a consultant or find some part-time gig, it really helps you stay sharp. And so some part-time gig. So this is just a different mindset from our grandparents and their parents' that were, familiar with the idea of once you reach a certain age, you just shut it down, and then at that point, I guess you begin enjoying your life beyond work. So just a little article here from Value Walk. And if you're interested, there's more graphs and more information down below and more details as to how they break it all down. But it's just interesting that 70% of Americans plan to work all the way through. So interesting article here. Here's an interesting article here out of Reuters, and it's behind Joe Stiglitz, dire view of the euro. So this is a summary or a short clip of a recent interview discussing his latest book, The Euro, How a Common Currency Threatens the Future of Europe. And they basically pulled a couple pieces of the conversation out, which basically at the end of the day paints a very bad picture for the euro in general. And it says, what is wrong with the euro when asked? When he's asked him what's wrong with the euro, the idea was driven by politics, by the desire to further European integration. The hope was that a single currency will lead to more prosperity, that in turn will lead to more solidarity, and in a ferocious cycle to more integration. But the politics wasn't strong enough to create the institutions that would make a single currency work. So the euro was flawed at the beginning. Then the next question was, what will be signs to look for the unraveling? If a party committed to a referendum does well in the polls, it could trigger capital outflows, putting the banking system into jeopardy. But the best of all would be for Europe to reform the Eurozone, finish the project, introduce quickly a banking union, most importantly, common deposit insurance, a solidarity fund to help countries facing a deficit, yada, yada, yada. Inflate the currency, more likely. Will we see fiscal policy take over from the monetary policies in rich countries? I am optimistic about the effectiveness of fiscal policy, basically saying he don't really trust the individual sovereign or who used to be sovereign nations to be able to handle themselves. And so basically QE has provided some limited stimulus to the economy, but at a cost. So QE has come at a cost. The risk of asset bubbles and increase in inequality. Poor retirees depending on T-bill returns have been hurt. Rich owners of equities have been helped. And an encouragement for firms to invest in capital-intensive technologies, making a jobless recovery more likely. So basically, a summary of what his thoughts are on the whole situation in Europe, which actually started here in the United States with QE, basically saying it creates asset bubbles and increases inequality, with poor retirees depending on T-bills receiving less return on their investment, and rich owners who have equities being paid better. So interesting short article here if you guys are interested, but yet just more of the truth in a way that is not intended to be informative, but it is if you're able to see through the fluff. So articles below. Here's the last article here from True News, and it's in regards to the Swiss bank's bet on negative interest rates. And so basically they're in negative territory, negative 1.2% to 0.25% thus far. And so basically here is just saying that coming up pretty soon they're going to be, meeting their monetary policy figures are going to be meeting there, the Swiss National Bank, Central Bank, and it's expected to stick to a script of negative interest rates and a commitment to foreign currency interventions when it gives its latest monetary policy update next week. And so it gives a couple highlights of what's to be expected. It says, despite improving economic developments and mounting criticism of its negative interest rates, the Swiss National Bank will keep the tools it has deployed since January 2015 when it scrapped its a policy of limiting the franc at the euro of 120 to the euro. So basically, no change there. They don't have any intentions on trying to get their rates back into the positive range. And then it says here, the bank is also expected to maintain its policy of negative interest rates despite it being criticized by pension funds, banks, and savers. And so at the expense of their own people's prosperity. The people who deposit their monies in the banks there and the people who invest their money in different assets there, they're basically saying, we're going to stay negative because we don't want our currency to be strong. And so it also hints at the fact that their exports are being hit by the fact that the Swiss franc is probably still too strong, in their opinion, for what they're trying to do for that small country there. So this is what's happening in the news. Hope you guys enjoyed this. As always, subscribe for more RTD news updates. And looking forward to bringing you more news. Enjoy your day.